Hello, fellow innovators. This is Patrick Emmons.
And this is Shelley Nelson.
Welcome to the Innovation and the Digital Enterprise Podcast, where we interview successful visionaries and leaders, giving you an insight into how they drive and support innovation within their organizations. Today, we're welcoming Mark Achler to the show. Currently, Mark is Managing Director at Math Venture Partners, which is an early-to-growth stage venture capital fund focused on technical and digital companies. He's also a serial entrepreneur with a true passion for building new businesses. Additionally, he's a faculty member at the Northwestern University Kellogg School of Management, where he teaches an entrepreneurship class about building innovation, teams, and culture. Mark is also a co-author of Exit Right, a book about how to sell your startup, maximize your return, and build your legacy. Mark also completed his bachelor's in history and economics at Purdue University. Welcome to the show, Mark.
Hey, Patrick, Shelley, I am so excited to be here. Thank you. I've been looking forward to this conversation.
Oh, thanks.
As have we. For those who aren't aware, Mark is one of the luminaries here in Chicago when it comes to startups, and he's just somebody, if you don't know him, you should get to know him. You should reach out and connect. Just a super awesome human being with an amazing experiences. So, and
Thanks.
Super generous. Always have a great conversation. So really excited to have you on the show. If you don't mind kicking us off a little bit and tell us a little bit about Math Venture Partners and what's going on. And I know we've got a lot of things to cover today. So excited to get in.
Yeah. So Math Venture Partners, early stage, primarily software technology venture capital fund. We have two funds and we are fully deployed in both funds. I think we have over 75 investments across those two funds. And our investment thesis is a little bit unusual. So I have a saying, which is the greatest product in the world without customers is a great product, but it's not a business. And so our investment thesis is we look for companies who not only can build great products as a baseline, but they have an unfair advantage and leverage in a sales model. They know how to sell. And so that's what we look for. And we are typically the first institutional round of investor. That said, we had a wonderful run. We started this math in 2014, and we just recently made the decision not to make any new investments, not to start a third fund. And so what that means is we're going to be focusing on our existing portfolio, but unfortunately, we're not going to be continuing to invest.
That's awesome. And some of the companies that are in your portfolio are some of the most widely recognized startups in Chicago.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
And it's even with you and Troy and your background and the other members, it is a history of creating value here in Chicago, creating successful business. I've been a customer of a few.
Yeah.
As well as knowing people who work and run those organizations. It's an amazing organization that you've all put together.
Thanks. I'm so grateful. Sometimes venture capitalists have a negative reputation, sometimes earned, but I am incredibly grateful for the passionate entrepreneurs that we have met and that we have helped, and all the jobs that we have created and all the products that have touched people's lives. And so when you think about it, the money that we have deployed has been such an important growth factor for Chicago, for our economy. We invest outside of Chicago as well. And, I like to lead with gratitude. I'm just really thankful for all those entrepreneurs out there.
And Mark, can you tell us a little bit more about this book that you just co-authored?
Yeah, I wrote a book. I co-authored a book with my co-author, Myrta Sherry, called Exit Right. And it's a great story. Can I tell you guys the founding story of the book? Because I think it's really fun.
Please.
So I met Mert 10 years ago. And Mert was just a young entrepreneur starting his first company, SwipeSense. And he pitched Troy and I, and we said no. I fell in love with Mert. Mert's a great guy, but it just didn't meet our investment thesis at the time. And so, but we became friends. A couple more years go by. His company is doing better. He's raised some money. He's going for his next round. He pitches Troy and I. We say no.
The story is not going where I think people would think it was going.
Exactly. But we became friends. We started going out for dinner. I had him over, him and his partner, Yuri, who are now in their 30s. They were in their 20s at the time. And I said to my wife, yeah, I invited Mert and Yuri over for dinner. And my wife says, what's a Mert and Yuri? And we became good friends, and time goes by. He is raising a third round. We said no again because it didn't meet our investment thesis. But when it came time to sell his company, I was the go-to call. And Troy, my partner, it was the go-to call. There were times, all transactions have an emotional arc. There are ups and there are downs. There are moments in time when transactions are hanging by a thread. And I was the call in the middle of the night to talk Mert off the ceiling. And eventually the deal gets done. And it's a week after the deal is done. It's the first week in March 2020, right as COVID's about to shut everything down, which put additional urgency in getting that deal done. And I'm having coffee with Mert, and he's just bitching. It's just like, Mert, man, this is a moment of joy, a moment of celebration. It's been 10 years. You just sold your company. And you're going to have to live with these people for the next X amount of years. Man, you need a reset. And so I said, in the spirit of giving back, why don't you write it all down? Write down what you went through. The company that bought his was SC Johnson, great company. And if they were buying a consumer packaged goods company, they could do it in their sleep. If they were buying supply chain, a warehouse, they know how to do that. But they had never bought a tech company before, and there were some nuances to it. And I said, look, write it all down so that the next time, now that you're on the inside, the next time SC Johnson buys a tech company, you can say, hey guys, this is what I experienced. This is what I went through. Here's how we can make the process better. So I poured 10 pages, and I looked at those 10 pages, and I went, there's a book here.
Wow.
And the reason there's a book here is because selling companies is kind of a taboo subject. Because, one, nobody talks about it because, look, there's confidentiality agreements, and nobody wants to violate a confidentiality agreement. Or two, if it was a good outcome, we're from the Midwest. We don't like to brag, and
right.
Or we don't want people to know our personal business or how much money we have. Or if it was a bad outcome, people are embarrassed, right? And so very few people talk about it, and CEOs don't talk about it with their boards. It's one of those conversations that doesn't happen. And I realize there's so much wisdom out there. There is art and science, but there is a lot of really important wisdom to be shared about the process of putting your company up for sale to maximize the outcome on lots of different levels for lots of different stakeholders. And what really surprised me about writing this book, we interviewed dozens and dozens of CEOs and got great stories, like the real stories. I went to the CEOs and say, look, if your adult child was selling a business, what would you tell them? Tell us the real stuff.
Right.
And we talked to bankers and deal attorneys and all the stakeholders and the heads of corp dev at all the major tech companies and product managers and everybody around a transaction. And I thought, so I'm a big believer in humility, or I try. And, I've been a CEO 4 times. I'd sold lots of companies. I'd been on the boards of dozens of companies who've gone through transactions. I thought, I have a pretty good handle on this. And I learned so much. Like if you spend 2 years of your life really focused on a topic, you're going to learn. And I learned a ton. And there's so much in the book that is really interesting. Interesting to me. My joke is, if you're having trouble going to sleep at night, a couple pages. Right.
What was the biggest learning?
Well, we created a framework that we call FAIR, which is fit, alignment, integration, and rationale. And I can talk about like cultural fit, how do you build alignment on both sides of an acquisition, the integration plan, which is the ugly stepchild of all transactions. We talk about that. But the rationale, what was really interesting to me was most transactions, and how I thought about transactions. I thought about transactions looking backwards, not looking forwards. So looking backwards, if you were to say, well, my company's worth some multiple of revenue, top line revenue, or some multiple of EBITDA, depending upon what industry you're in and how companies get valued. Most companies get valued looking at a historic number with some kind of multiple that says, okay, I'll give you some benefit for the future, but a little bit. And what I came to understand on the rationale, what I want to know is, how is 1 + 1 = 100? Because looking backwards is looking at your company based on previous performance, not taking into account. So I'm a technology guy, so I'll talk about technology companies, not taking into account if you integrate into the larger company that's acquiring you. What happens if you take their sales team or their distribution channels and you plug your product into their sales engine, or have access to their customer base? Or strategically, if your product can plug a hole so that the larger acquiring company, they can maybe get more market share and sell more of their core product. Or retention. What if you can improve the retention rate of the much larger core company's product? What is that worth, right? And so I tell a story about my partner, Troy. Can I tell you guys a quick story?
Please.
Yeah. So my partner, Troy, in 1991, he had a little development company, a little dev shop. And dev shops, when they get sold, usually get sold for like 1x, maybe 1.5x revenue. And he did a project for Hyatt Hotels that was an inventory management system that he retained the rights to. And so he was going to pitch Medline, and he pitches them on this little inventory management system. And when they're done, they go, yeah, that's great. We want it, but we want to buy you. And Troy goes, well, I'm not for sale. I have my little company. I love my company. And they go, no, we want to buy you. So they gave him an offer of 2x, which was very generous. And Troy said, no, thanks. I'm not interested. They came back a week later at like 3x. No, I'm not interested. 2 weeks later, they come back at 5x for a dev shop.
This is 91. What time was it?
91.
That's crazy.
And Troy goes, well, okay. Fine. Right. And Troy's thinking to himself, I am the smartest human being on the planet. Like I just sold my little dev shop for 5x. But Troy never stopped to ask them why. Like, what's the rationale? Like, why do you care so much about this little inventory management software? What's the point? Turns out that what they did was brilliant. So what they did is they currently had 1-year contracts with most of the hospitals and selling supplies to most of the hospitals in the country. And they went to their customers and they said, we have this new inventory management software. It's great. You'll need it. We'll give it to you for free if you take your 1-year contract and make it a 3-year contract. Do you know what happened? The very first year, they did over $100 million in new revenue. What's $100 million of revenue at Medline's multiple worth? That's year 1. What about year 2, year 3? Mm-hmm. So Troy, he thought, oh, I got this incredible deal. I sold for 5x. What he didn't realize is he generated probably over $1 billion of value. So that's an example, a pretty good example, a pretty personal example of understanding the rationale, that the rationale for a transaction is more about the value you can create in the future as opposed to looking in the past.
That's tremendous. Thinking of that story, the other component that, because I'm a nerd and I have to over-architect things, think about the refill value of knowing exactly what's at each hospital, right? So not only locking up the contracts, but like now my sales team just got super efficient of like, this hospital needs 10 times of this, and how much of competitor product you're going to move off their shelves because you're just walking in scanning things now.
Genius.
Yeah, it is genius. Brilliant.
Genius. Well, another example was Facebook buying Instagram. At the time, it was like, I think it was 2011 when that happened. Everybody thought Zuckerberg was nuts. He just went public relatively recently, spent just under $1 billion for a company with 40 employees and virtually no revenue. And the world thought, you're an idiot. Like, why in the world would you spend $1 billion? And, I think last year, Instagram represented, I don't know, it was like $20 billion of profit. It's a third of the revenue of the company. It took them, what people didn't understand, myself included, at the time, is Facebook was very much web-based and not mobile. Instagram was mobile forward, mobile first. And Instagram, you took Instagram, which was going through the roof in terms of users and utilization, and you plug them into the Facebook sales engine and the Facebook customer base, like magic happened.
Wow.
So that's just another, that's a lot. Shelley, you asked me one simple question.
Well, I do think people sometimes forget Facebook's really its huge guffaw on the mobile platform when it first started coming out, right?
That's right.
They really kind of, they pooped the bed on that one a little bit when it came to like, they weren't going native software. They were using some really low performing technology, and it really was a big goof up. So it is. And I was one of those people when I saw that, and I thought, wow, they're insane. And
yeah, so understanding the rationale, like that was that's sort of like one of the big aha moments for me. And I'm a fairly experienced. I've gone through many a transaction.
I use the term happy ears when things like this happen, like you get the offer, right? And even for everybody on listening, right? You've had that moment where you're applying for a job or you're trying to get something accomplished, and then, it's hard to have the grace at that moment of a very emotional thing that's going on to pull yourself out, look at it from a third person perspective and go, well, why is this? What is really afoot here? Right. As opposed to living in that emotional moment. I think that's kind of a critical skill set.
It is, but you bring up a great point, which is most transactions happen at a moment of time. So a fairly short window of time. And it is incredibly emotional on all different levels, good and bad. Here's the thing. In the book, we talk about an annual exit talk. I'm going to talk about that in a second. And part of the reason why an annual exit talk is helpful is I think a transaction should be thought of and considered over years, not over weeks. Because if you are building a relationship, so I'll use technology. If you're a technology company and you think the most likely acquirer might be a strategic acquirer as opposed to a private equity acquirer, and there's probably some universe of potential acquirers, but there's probably like 5 to 10 that are the most likely. My recommendation to CEOs, start early. Start building relationships. Talk to the heads of corp dev. Talk to product managers of the much larger company. Understand their business as well as you understand your business. Understand their holes. Understand their direction. because the more you understand over time the strategic initiatives and holes of the potential acquirer, the easier it is to build that rationale. So that don't think of that rationale as all of a sudden, the knock on the door, somebody says, we want to buy your company. That's the dream
The
scenario.
sweepstakes. Yeah.
The sweepstakes. Oh, wow. Right. That's what happened with Troy. But if you think about it as that you take the time over years to really understand who the potential strategic acquirers are and what their long-term needs are, that can help you build that rationale. And by the way, one great way of doing it, there's the personal connections, obviously, but if it's a publicly traded company, they have quarterly earnings calls.
Mm-hmm.
Listen in to the quarterly earnings calls. Hear the questions that analysts are asking. Listen to the KPIs that the company is reporting on. So I have these empathy rules, which is, it's not about you. Do your homework and bring a gift. So it's not about you. It's always about them. Do your homework, like really do your homework, and bring a gift is how do you add value to them, not to you. So do your homework. So if it's a publicly traded company, listen to their earnings calls. Listen to the questions the analysts are asking. Listen to what the numbers they're reporting on. And then when you're having conversations with them, instead of saying, my technology does X, Y, Z, say the impact of my technology on you, on the metrics that you care about. I can improve retention rate. I can improve, land and expand. I can, the average revenue per customer. I can extend the lifetime value of a customer. Whatever those metrics are, like the Jedi mind trick is to frame the conversation not about you, but about them and the impact that you can have on their business.
It's brilliant. You sound like a product owner, right?
Yeah.
I think you bring up a great point when I talk to other entrepreneurs. They value their business based upon what they value their business at, right?
Yes. Yes.
It's like whenever you watch Pawn Stars, right? It's like, well, this should be $1,000. Like it's $50, right? And it's like, well, we know you love it, but you don't get paid for. There's no value in how much you love your asset, right? And so, really getting outside of your own head and seeing like, well, I also think that would be very influential and helpful to like understand like, are the acquirers that you're considering, right? Are they actually the ones you should be considering, or should you be right bouncing around a little bit more and checking some other areas and seeing like, okay, so maybe this isn't a fit. I mean, I think we all recognize there's going to be some serious changes over the next couple of years. So it'll be interesting to see how what an organization values is going to change in the next 24, 38, 48 months.
Well, also, I pray at the altar of revenue. So a lot of times technology companies fall in love with their technology. And my question always is, operational efficiency is good, saving money is good, better tech is good, making money is better.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're talking about a potential transaction, especially in difficult markets, my question is, how do you frame the impact of your company, product, service in a way that is accretive, not viewed as additional expense? So there's a framing here that I think is also really important.
And I think I use the term multipliers, right? It can't be just additive, right?
Right. No, it has to be a force multiplier.
Yeah.
Otherwise, why do it?
Right. And your story about Troy, it hits on that exactly. Of like, they're giving him 5X because it's going to be 10 plus X for them, right? That's simple math for them. That is stupid easy for them to spend that money. And I think that's part of it, is to understand where are you, because they're looking to accelerate something, right? But that said, there are some stupid buyers in the world, right?
Oh, for sure.
Because I've seen some service companies getting picked up for crazy multiples where you're like, what were you thinking there? How do you ever hope to, especially in a service company?
Well, yeah. I mean, look, there are frothy markets and difficult markets. You know, we just lived through a 10-year period, a 13-year period that culminated in a really frothy market where I have another saying, which is the business fundamentals always matter eventually. Eventually, you know, the business fundamentals always matter. And actually, that's going to come back, I think, this year. One of the things that I don't think a lot of people are focusing on and should in difficult economic times. So I love debt. So I think debt is a wonderful instrument.
I just love the things you say. Nobody, I love debt. That's fantastic. I love it. Well, it's brilliant, but I've never heard anybody say I love debt, but that's tremendous.
Well, look, it's a fantastic instrument when there's predictability, right? When markets are up and down and there's not predictability, or you can't raise more capital and capital becomes scarce. So I think that there is an upcoming debt apocalypse. So you talk about people doing irrational things. In the past few years, prior to this year, a lot of companies were laddering up on debt. And when business is good, it's great. But man.
And if there's cheap cash.
And you can raise another round, fine. Well, what happens when cash dries up and business starts to soften and you start to trip your covenants? That friendly banker who takes you out to dinner and drinks and takes you to the Cubs game, that, all of a sudden they bring out the knuckle dragger on the, they don't care, right? They're like, I think there's a lot of companies who have debt on the books right now that are going to start tripping covenants in the next year or two and are going to be in for a world of hurt, and they don't even know it's coming.
Wow. That is, I think you've got a great point. Because, I mean, it's a decade plus, Baker's dozen years of some pretty cheap cash, right? And you see people who really shouldn't be saying things about debt that like, hey, you're a sucker for not using more debt. And it's like, but there's a clock on that, right? To your point of like, you can only do it for so long.
Well, you trip a covenant and the bank can call the note, or the lender can call the note. It's like, I'm starting to see that across our portfolio companies, across other companies that I'm aware of, where lenders are saying, you tripped a covenant, I want my money back.
Oh, and in that case, I mean, I know when that occurs and they want their money back, does that mean I've seen it and I've only known of it. I've never personally been involved in a situation like that. Generally, you're going to go out and try and find some other mitigating lending sources to start paying some of that back, but the rates get pretty terrible, and
it is a downward spiral.
Yeah, it feels like payday loan kind of time.
It is, and here's another thing too. Now I'm going off topic, guys. Sorry. I'm kind of like, you remember the Muppet Show, the two guys and the hey, you kids, get off the lawn. Right. Yeah, right. I have come to deeply appreciate when there is relative economic balance between different classes of shareholders. And it really bothers me, and not perfectly, of course. I don't think everybody's equal, but it really bothers me when there's extremes. So in the past few years, when the valuations weren't tethered to underlying economic reality, the economic interests of the entrepreneurs and the investors weren't always aligned. And the same is coming on the other end of the spectrum now. And I saw valuations where companies with zero revenue wanted a $50 million pre-money valuation. It's like, how do I make money? How does that even compute? Like, it's not going to happen. And all of these investors who said, I don't care what I buy in at, as long as the next person down the line pays more.
Mm.
It's like a Ponzi scheme, right?
That sounds like a Ponzi scheme.
Right? But the same thing is happening in reverse now. So now the pendulum is swinging back, and investors, to your point, the terms are becoming significantly more onerous. So participating preferred, 2x, 4x, 6x multiples, cumulative annual dividends of 9%. And what's happening is, good luck with that, because try selling one of your companies where the preferred shareholders have significantly different economic interests. If the common shareholders are going to get zero, human behavior is pretty predictable in some ways, right? Like you can pretty much predict if somebody's going to make money and the other person's going to get zero, how the person who's going to get zero is going to act, right? And so, like, I think there is value for having preferred shares and control mechanisms, but I like balance. And I think all of these investors who said, yeah, I don't care about valuations, it doesn't matter, those are the same people who are now getting their pound of flesh theoretically and saying, yeah, now I want a 6x multiple, right? It's the same person. And I think they're really bad VCs. Either side.
Interesting.
Anyway, that's it. Now I can get off my rant.
And I think it's especially now, because it does seem like there's a bit of a bill coming due for a lot of people and a lot of things. And, one of the things that I know is a big issue for you, and I think from my perspective is one of the things that separates you from a lot of people. And also I think it's probably the foundation for a lot of your success is that you really focus on trust. And you mentioned that in, even in this transactional environment of like, we're going to go sell our company at some point, it's really about the trust of getting to know some of those people before you decide to do some business. And it's something that I know that they talk about with, what's his face? The guy down in Omaha.
Warren Buffett.
I'm, again, diminished skills phase of my career. But Warren Buffett, it takes him a month to do a deal because he's got trust with the people that he works with, right? It helps speed things along. So you've got a lot to share there. I would love for you to share with our listeners your perspective on trust and how critical that is for long-term success.
Well, it's everything. I gave a talk a couple of years back called The Inevitable Economics of Trust. And I think about it not only in terms of interpersonal relationships, but in terms of a longer time horizon. Because if you believe in the life, like I ask CEOs all the time, I say, what do you measure? Do you measure transactions? Do you measure monthly revenue? Like, what do you measure? Do you measure lifetime value of a customer? Because if you value the lifetime value of a customer across years, then you're willing to invest in that relationship because over time that relationship has value. And I'm just a huge believer in trust. I think trust is the lubrication that enables relationships to stay intact. So in not only interpersonal relationships between people, but relationships between people and companies and brands. Like, we're human. We all make mistakes. And trust allows for the benefit of the doubt. And the benefit of the doubt is so powerful and important in terms of believing that somebody has good intentions. I use social media. I don't know about you. About 2016, I got off of all social media except LinkedIn. LinkedIn's the only thing I use, and I only use it for business purposes. But I got off of Twitter and I got off of Facebook. And I think social media, here's an example. I think social media is really powerful and has important societal impact and important positive value if used appropriately. But it also can be used to manipulate elections, or people have died, or spread misinformation or hate. And this concept about free speech. So I think of trust. I use social media as an example. I think they have fundamentally violated our trust. I don't believe that in this argument that social media is simply a platform, that they're not responsible for the content that sits on top of the platform. They're just the platform itself. I think that they have armies of people who manipulate each user to spend, like, you ever get the email, oh, you haven't been on Facebook in 3 days. Here's everything you've missed. Like, inherently you're being manipulated. And I think they've been poor guardians of our data, whether they're, the Facebook selling our data or there have been data breaches, but they've been poor guardians and not responsible for our data. And through all of that, I feel like this is not the first time. I'll give you some as a history teacher, I'll give you some historic precedent. Think back to the 1960s or 70s, your hometown newspaper. So Patrick and Shelley, where did you grow up?
Mount Prospect.
Fox River Grove.
Okay, so I'll use Chicago. So imagine the Chicago Tribune in the 1960s.
We were more of a Daily Herald fan.
Okay, Daily Herald. Imagine the Daily Herald, right? So the Daily Herald, they had news, right, that they published. They had op-eds, but they had a journalistic code of ethics.
Mm-hmm.
They had a journalistic board who reviewed all the content. They had ads, like they had big, giant display ads. And remember want ads, when a third of the newspaper was want ads, right?
That's how I found jobs.
Right.
I try to explain that to people. You actually had to go get the newspaper to find a job.
Right. So they had plenty of ads, but they also had a journalistic code of ethics. And so if somebody printed something in an ad that violated their journalistic code, would the newspaper publish it? No, they would not. Right? Would they publish news? Would they publish an op-ed? Would they publish an op-ed written by one of their readers that violated their journalistic code of ethics?
No.
They had free speech, right? Do you know why that journalistic code of ethics came to be? This is a great story.
Because of the 1920s and just the absolute bombastic lies in New York and...
Well, yeah, you're close. You're really, really close.
Okay.
So
it's the broadsheets, right? It was.
Yeah, you're right there. So it's the 1890s. So the 1890s, it was yellow journalism and sinking of the Maine and the Spanish-American War. And the yellow journalists, they're just making up shit. Like they were just constantly printing lies and getting people all riled up to go to war. And the American public, it was Joseph Pulitzer versus...
Yeah, I can't help you, but
right?
yes, I do.
right. Yeah, William Randolph Hearst. So William Randolph Hearst, Joseph Pulitzer, and they're just having these pulp wars. And finally, the American public got fed up, and they went to their Congress. Now, that was a time when maybe Congress was actually a little bit more functional than today, but they went to their Congress and they said, you do something about this. And so Congress went to them and they said to the industry, and they said, clean up your act. If you don't clean up your act, we're going to do it for you. And they created this journalistic code of ethics. And Pulitzer, in a great PR move, created the Pulitzer Prize for journalistic integrity and ethics, right? And so the pendulum swings. And I actually personally believe that the pendulum's going to swing again. And so I think trust is essential. And I'll give you an example in my world, the venture capital world. And this was an interesting conversation between an LP and me. And I said, I want to create transactions that I'm not always worried about squeezing the very last penny out of a deal. I want to make sure that I take care of everybody and that the deal works for everybody. And I had an LP, an investor, who's going, wait a minute, you're not doing your fiduciary responsibility. You're not, like, your job is to squeeze every penny out of a deal. And I said to him, well, If you look at it through the lens of one deal and only one deal, then you are right. But if you look at it across a portfolio of companies, across a long period of time, across multiple transactions, I have seen VCs do exactly that. Just use deal docs to squeeze every last penny and hurt other investors and hurt the entrepreneurs to maximize return. And I said, do you think that entrepreneur, when they have their next company, they're going to invite that VC back? No way. Do you think they're going to tell other entrepreneurs about that experience? Absolutely. Do you think your fellow VCs, a lot of our deal flow comes from other venture capitalists who say, hey, I'm looking at this deal, or I'm an investor in this deal. Do you want to come on in and join me? Do you think if I screwed them in a prior transaction that they will invite me into their next one? And oftentimes the difficult transactions are the ones that don't return as much. And so I said to the LP, my job is to create value across longer time horizon, across many companies, not just one company. And the guy went, I'm sorry.
Oh, it's tremendous. It's such a great perspective, and I think it's one that I've seen many successful people, whether you're focused on selling your business or growing your professional experience. I think too often people do get caught up in these moments, right?
No, sure.
And I think it's unfortunately, it's people are afraid of potential disrespect or being taken advantage of, and that's the fear that they respond to sometimes.
Yeah.
And it's to your point of like, hey, I didn't get the raise I wanted, I didn't get this, I didn't get that. But if you think about the longer term and what's possible by extending that, and just thinking, well, what would be different, what's possible in 12 months, what's possible in even 5-6 months, that if just keep moving forward. And I say that because I think it's one of the most important lessons I learned, that it's really important to extend that horizon and remove some of that pressure that we manufacture. We manufacture that pressure.
Amen. I ask CEOs this all the time. I say, in a transaction, I say, will your employees come to your management team, come to work for you the next time you start a company? Mm. Will your investors invest in your next company? Will the head of corp dev who bought your company, when he's moved on to the next company, will they buy your next company? I don't think of a transaction as a moment in time. Think of it as an opportunity to build relationships and value over time.
Absolutely. Mark, what a pleasure. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing your perspective. It's always illuminating. I always enjoy our conversations. You always have such a great perspective. I think there's a lot of lessons to learn here. And I have not read your book, but I'm highly motivated I just added to the list the other day. So
once again, if you're having trouble sleeping at night,
I don't think that'll be the case. Yeah. I love the strategy component, and I love hearing the war stories. The tales from the front of like what really happens. I love those types of books. So I'm looking forward to it.
We have great stories.
Can't wait to read it.
All right. Well, Patrick and Shelley, I've got to run. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you. We also wanted to thank our listeners. We really appreciate everyone taking the time to join us.
And if you'd like to receive new episodes as they're published, you can subscribe by visiting our website at dragonspears.com/podcast. or find us on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
This episode was sponsored by Dragon Spears and produced by Dante32.